Wealthy elderly man pretends to sleep on a park bench, and what the poor girl does you won't believe. He left his wallet visible and waited for someone to fall into temptation. But the girl did something he never would have imagined. In that moment, everything changed and began the story that shocked the country. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. Richard Miller woke up that September morning with the same feeling of emptiness that had accompanied him for 3 years, ever since Elizabeth had passed away. The immense bedroom in the Westridge mansion seemed even larger, without her presence. The imported silk curtains swayed gently with the breeze coming through the window, while the sun cast shadows on the Italian marble floor. At 72 years old, Richard had accumulated considerable wealth in real estate. 3 vacation homes, a collection of vintage cars, investments in international markets, and a bank account that few Americans could dream of. But what good was all that now? Without Elizabeth, even the air seemed heavier, more difficult to breathe. The sound of the doorbell interrupted his thoughts. It was probably Josephine, the housekeeper who had worked for him for more than 20 years, or perhaps one of his 3 children, Philip, Mark, or Victoria, coming for the monthly visit that seemed more like an obligation than a family gathering. "Good morning, Mr. Richard," said Josephine as she entered the room carrying a breakfast tray. "Dr. Philip called to say he'll be coming later with the lawyer, something about those transfer papers for the apartments in Oakwood." Richard sighed, again with the papers, the documents, the possessions. Since he had fallen slightly ill last month, his children seemed more concerned with dividing his assets than with his health. "Remember when they used to come here just for Sunday lunch, Josephine? When they brought the grandchildren and the house was full of noise?" The housekeeper nodded with a sad smile. "Mrs. Elizabeth always said that a house without children is like a garden without flowers." "Elizabeth," Richard murmured, feeling the weight of the memory. She gave meaning to all this. She knew the value of simple things. After breakfast, Richard decided to do something different. He asked his driver to take him to Central Park, a place he used to frequent with Elizabeth on weekends. He dismissed his security guard, ignoring the employee's protests about the dangers of the city. Sitting on an ordinary bench, he observed people hurrying past. Families, couples, elderly people like him, each in their own world. He felt the heavy wallet in his jacket's inner pocket, filled with $100 bills. A strange idea came to his mind. He took out his wallet and left it partially visible, on his lap. He closed his eyes and pretended to fall asleep, but kept them slightly open to observe people's reactions. He wanted to know what would happen. Would he be robbed? Ignored? Helped? During the last family meeting, Philip had said something that deeply disturbed him. "Dad, you need to understand that in today's world, people only care about what they can gain. Nobody does anything for free." Richard wanted to prove his son wrong. He needed to believe that kindness still existed in the world, something Elizabeth had always defended with unwavering conviction. The hours passed slowly. People looked, some with suspicion, others with indifference. A man in a suit even slowed his pace, observing the exposed wallet, but continued on after a moment of hesitation. 2 teenagers laughed and pointed, but no one approached. As the sun began to set, Richard felt a profound disappointment. Perhaps Philip was right after all. He was about to give up when he noticed a small figure approaching. It was a girl of approximately 10 years old, with messy black hair and simple clothes. She carried a worn teddy bear in one hand and what appeared to be a thin blanket in the other. Her bare feet stepped carefully on the concrete ground. Richard expected her to take the wallet. It would be sad, but it would confirm his theory about human nature. However, to his surprise, the girl approached silently and carefully, covered his shoulders with the worn blanket she was carrying. Then she placed the teddy bear on his lap, next to the wallet full of money. The gesture caught him completely off guard. This child, who clearly had so little, had just given everything she owned to a stranger she believed needed help. Richard felt something break inside him, a barrier he had built around his heart after losing Elizabeth. When the girl began to walk away, Richard fully opened his eyes. "Wait!" he called with a choked voice. The girl turned around, showing no surprise at seeing him awake. Her dark eyes carried a maturity disproportionate to her age. "Why did you do that?" asked Richard, holding the blanket and the teddy bear. "You seem to need it more than me," she responded simply. "My grandmother always said that when we see someone sleeping in the cold, we should warm them." "But your teddy bear?" "His name is Brave," explained the girl. "He protects against nightmares. I thought you might be having one." Richard felt tears forming in his eyes. How could this child, in her innocence and poverty, demonstrate such generosity, while his own children, raised with all comfort and education, could only think about inheritance? "What's your name?" asked Richard, discreetly wiping away a tear. "Sophie," she replied. "And yours?" "Richard, nice to meet you, Sophie." "I need to go now," said the girl, looking at the darkening sky. "It's getting late." "Wait," Richard asked again, extending the teddy bear and blanket back to her. "These are yours. I can't accept them." Sophie shook her head. "You can keep them for today. I'll come back tomorrow to get them." Before Richard could insist, Sophie ran off, disappearing among the people still strolling through the park. Richard sat motionless, holding the worn blanket and the small bear. The wallet, with all its money, remained untouched on his lap. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. The image of little Sophie, her bare feet, and the gesture of selfless generosity occupied his thoughts. He placed the teddy bear Brave on the nightstand and spread the worn blanket over the armchair in his bedroom. Those simple objects seemed out of place amid the luxury of his suite, but somehow they brought a comforting presence to the environment. When day broke, Richard had already made his decision. He dismissed his driver and took a taxi to Central Park. He needed to find Sophie, return her belongings, and perhaps understand better this child who had touched his heart with such a pure gesture. The park was relatively empty on that Tuesday morning. Richard sat on the same bench as the day before and waited patiently. Hours passed without a sign of the girl. When the sun was already high, he decided to look for her in the surrounding areas. He asked street vendors, park guards, regular visitors. No one knew a girl named Sophie who walked barefoot with a teddy bear. Frustrated but determined, Richard expanded his search to the park's vicinity. It was then that a recycling collector gave him a clue. "A girl like that? Must be Sophie, who stays in those alleys near the Riverside community. She always helps everyone around there, even though she has nothing." With this information, Richard headed to the indicated location. The difference between his upscale neighborhood and that region was striking. Narrow alleys, precariously stacked houses, open sewers. He felt out of place in his expensive suit, but continued walking. After asking a few questions, he was directed to a pile of cardboard boxes under a viaduct. The place served as an improvised shelter for some homeless people. It was there that he spotted Sophie sitting on an overturned box, sharing a piece of bread with a skinny yellow mongrel dog. The scene impacted him deeply. There was that girl who had given him everything she possessed the day before, living in such inhumane conditions. Yet Sophie smiled as she fed the animal, as if that moment were a feast. Richard approached hesitantly. "Sophie?" The girl looked up, recognizing him immediately. Her face lit up with a genuine smile. "Mr. Richard, you really came." "I promised I'd bring your belongings back," he said, showing the carefully folded blanket and the teddy bear Brave. "Did Brave help you?" "Did you have any nightmares?" she asked with sincere concern. Richard felt a lump in his throat. "He helped a lot. I didn't have any nightmares." The dog approached, sniffing his pants with suspicion. Sophie petted the animal's head. "This is Caramel. He keeps me company." Richard looked around, noting the precariousness of the place. "Sophie, do you live here?" She nodded naturally. "Yes, for 2 years now, since my grandmother got sick and couldn't take care of me anymore." "And your parents?" "I never knew my father. My mother left when I was a baby. My grandmother raised me until she had to go to heaven." The way Sophie spoke about her situation, without self-pity or anger, touched Richard deeply. It was as if she accepted life as it was, finding beauty even in the most adverse circumstances, exactly as Elizabeth used to do. "Do you go to school?" asked Richard. Sometimes I go to the public school nearby. The principal is nice. She lets me in even without all the documents, but it's hard to go every day because I need to collect cans and bottles to sell. As they talked, Richard observed that despite the precarious conditions, Sophie's boxes were meticulously organized. There were colorful drawings pinned to the cardboard walls, shiny pebbles aligned at the entrance, and even a small collection of children's books protected by plastic against moisture. "Do you like to read?" he asked, pointing to the books. Sophie's eyes sparkled. "Very much. My grandmother was a teacher before she got sick. She taught me that in books, we can travel anywhere, even without leaving our place." Richard smiled, remembering Elizabeth saying something similar to their grandchildren, who preferred video games to books. The similarity between his late wife's life philosophy and this little girl's was remarkable. At that moment, he noticed another child approaching, a boy of approximately 8 years old, limping slightly. Sophie immediately stood up to help. "Him? Michael, did you get the medicine for your mom?" she asked with concern. The boy shook his head negatively with tears in his eyes. "The pharmacy wouldn't accept the health center voucher. They said they've already accepted too many this month." Sophie hugged her friend and looked at the remaining piece of bread. Without hesitation, she gave it to the boy. "Take this to her. It's not medicine, but it will help her stay strong." Richard observed the scene in silence, feeling a mixture of admiration and shame. How many times had he ignored donation requests for charitable institutions, considering them inconvenient? How many times had he complained about the value of taxes that could help people like Sophie and Michael? "Michael, wait," called Richard, taking his wallet from his pocket. He removed some bills and handed them to the boy. "This should be enough. For your mother's medicine and to buy food for you all." The boy's eyes widened at seeing the money. It's a lot of money, sir. Use what you need for the medicine and bring the rest to Sophie to keep for you," instructed Richard. Sophie watched the scene with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. When Michael left hurriedly, she turned to Richard. "You're a good person. Mr. Richard, I knew it since yesterday when I saw you in the park." "No, Sophie, you're the good person here. I'm just learning from you." As they talked, Richard noticed a group of teenagers approaching. Sophie immediately tensed up, pulling Caramel close to her. The dog began to growl softly. "It's those boys again," she murmured. "You better leave." "Who are they?" asked Richard, noticing the sudden change in the girl's behavior. "They don't like us. Last week they destroyed Mr. Paul's boxes and threw away Mrs. Marlene's medicines." Richard felt indignation growing inside him. In his protected world, he rarely had to deal with direct confrontations. There were always security guards, lawyers, or assistants to resolve unpleasant situations. But something inside him refused to abandon Sophie at that moment. "I'm not leaving," Richard stated with a firmness that surprised even himself. "I won't leave you alone." Sophie seemed confused by his reaction. In her world, people like Richard, well-dressed and of affluent appearance, usually walked away at the first sign of trouble. But there was no time for discussions. The teenagers were already approaching. There were 5 young men between 15 and 17 years old. The leader, a tall boy with a scar on his eyebrow, pointed at Sophie. "Look who's here, the little saint of the slums, and brought a rich friend today," he mocked, looking Richard up and down. "What's up, Grandpa? Lost your way back to the gated community?" Richard remained calm, protecting Sophie with his body. "We're just talking. We don't want any trouble." The group laughed in unison. One of the boys, stockier, began kicking the boxes that formed Sophie's. "Shelter? Talking about what? About how she's going to rob you when you turn your back." Sophie held Caramel, who was barking furiously. "Please stop. Don't destroy my things." The leader of the group moved closer, staring at Richard. "You know what happens to rich people who come here playing nice? They leave without their wallet, without their watch, and sometimes without teeth." Richard felt fear growing, but something stronger prevented him from backing down. He remembered Elizabeth, how she faced adversities with dignity and courage. He thought of his children, who probably never risked anything for anyone but themselves. "You're just frustrated kids," Richard said firmly. "Hurting weaker people won't improve your lives." The response came in the form of a push that made Richard stagger. Sophie screamed and tried to position herself between him and the aggressors, but was brutally pushed away. Caramel lunged forward, biting the leg of one of the boys, who retaliated with a kick to the animal. Seeing the dog being attacked, Richard lost his composure. He rushed against the aggressor, managing to push him away from the dog. It was his first and only successful blow. Within seconds, he found himself surrounded by the boys, who began to assault him simultaneously. The pain was intense, but Richard refused to fall. Each blow he received seemed to awaken an inner strength he didn't know he had. Sophie screamed for help, while Caramel, even injured, tried to defend his new friend. When a particularly strong punch hit him in the face, Richard tasted the metallic flavor of blood. His vision became blurry, and he began to lose his balance. It was at this critical moment that something unexpected happened. One of the teenagers, the youngest in the group, who until then had only been watching without actively participating in the aggression, suddenly intervened. "Enough, Mark. You're going to end up killing the old man." Mark, the leader, turned furiously to his companion. "Since when did you become a defender of bums, Julian?" The boy called Julian seemed genuinely disturbed by the situation. "Just look at him. Look at the girl. This isn't right, man." There was a moment of tension between the two, until the distant sound of a siren caused the group to quickly disperse. Before leaving, Julian looked at Richard and Sophie with a complex expression, a mixture of shame and something that seemed like a silent request for forgiveness. When the aggressors disappeared, Sophie ran to help Richard, who had fallen to his knees on the ground. His face was bloodied and he was breathing with difficulty. "Mr. Richard, are you okay? Please answer," begged Sophie, with tears streaming down her face. Richard coughed, trying to catch his breath. I'm alive. How's Caramel?" The dog limped toward them, whimpering softly. Sophie hugged him carefully. "He'll be okay, but you're badly hurt." With effort, Richard managed to sit against a wall. Sophie ran to fetch water in a plastic bottle kept in her shelter. With gentleness, she used a clean piece of her blanket to clean the blood from the elderly man's face. "Why did you do that? Why didn't you run when you had the chance?" she asked, confused. Richard looked into the girl's eyes with an intensity that surprised them both. "Because I've run away too much in life, Sophie. Ran from responsibilities, ran from helping those in need, ran from being the person my wife Elizabeth believed I could be." As Sophie tended to his wounds, Richard began to tell his story. He spoke about how he built his real estate empire, often ignoring the social impact of his developments. He told about Elizabeth, who had always tried to balance his ambition with compassion, discreetly creating social projects with part of the family fortune. "She used to go out at night when I was on business trips. I only discovered later that she visited underprivileged communities, bringing food, clothes, books. My children never knew about this. I myself only found out when I discovered her diaries after she passed away." Sophie listened attentively, still carefully cleaning his wounds. "Your wife seemed to be a wonderful person." "She was," confirmed Richard with a choked voice. "And you know what breaks my heart? She believed I was a good person, Sophie. She believed that beneath the ruthless businessman there was a man capable of compassion, but I never proved that to her during her lifetime." At that moment, Richard made a decision that would change his life forever. Looking at Sophie, at Caramel, at the cardboard boxes that served as shelter, he saw what Elizabeth had always tried to show him. The true essence of human value was not in material possessions, but in the capacity to care for others. "Sophie," he said, holding the girl's small hands, "I want to make you a proposal." The girl looked at him with curiosity. Richard continued, "I have a house that's too big for a lonely old man. I have resources that I've never used for anything truly important. I want to help you, Caramel, Michael, and other children who live in these conditions." Sophie's eyes widened. "What do you mean, Mr. Richard?" "I want to create a place where children like you can have a roof, food, education, and, most importantly, dignity. A place that honors Elizabeth's memory and everything she believed in." Sophie seemed not to believe what she was hearing. "You would do that? For us?" "No, Sophie. I'll do this for myself too. To finally become the person Elizabeth always saw in me, The person who perhaps was always there but that I myself couldn't see. As they talked, a familiar figure approached hesitantly. It was Julian, the teenager who had interrupted the aggression. "Are you okay?" he asked, keeping his distance, clearly wary of the reception he would receive. Richard and Sophie looked at each other, surprised by the boy's return. Caramel growled softly, but Sophie calmed him with a pet. "What do you want?" asked Richard, with understandable distrust. Julian seemed genuinely remorseful. I wanted to apologize. What we did was wrong. I never wanted to be part of it, but it's easier to follow the crowd than to do what's right," completed Richard. The teenager lowered his head. "My dad always says people like you only serve to dirty the city, but seeing you defend Sophie like that, risking your life, I don't know, it made something change in here." He pointed to his own chest. Sophie, with the generosity that characterized her, extended her hand to Julian. "Everyone makes mistakes, Julian. The important thing is to realize it and try to fix it." 6 months passed since that confrontation under the viaduct. Richard Miller's life had changed completely. His mansion in Westridge, once silent and cold, now echoed with children's laughter and animated conversations. Sophie was the first to move in. After an intense bureaucratic process involving social workers, lawyers, and judges, Richard obtained her temporary guardianship. Caramel, of course, accompanied the girl, quickly adapting to life with a yard and regular meals. Michael and his mother, Mrs. Cecilia, who suffered from a chronic illness, were also welcomed. Richard provided adequate medical treatment, and in a few weeks the woman's health improved significantly. 5 other children in vulnerable situations completed the new family that was forming. The transformation didn't please everyone. The RC. First time Philip, Mark, and Victoria visited the mansion after the changes, the reaction was explosive. "Have you completely lost your mind?" vociferated Philip, the firstborn, upon seeing Sophie and the other children playing in the living room. "You've turned our family home into an orphanage, and that mutt on the Italian sofa." Victoria, the youngest daughter, didn't disguise her disgust. "Dad, what will people think? A man your age bringing street children to live here? This will generate comments, scandals." Mark, always the most pragmatic, went straight to the point. "It's your money being spent on these people, money that would be rightfully ours." Richard observed his 3 children, people he had raised himself, with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. How had he not noticed before how materialistic and insensitive they had become? "First," he responded with surprising calmness, "this house is mine and will continue to be as long as I live. Second, what I do with my money is exclusively my decision. And third, perhaps you should learn a bit from these children about generosity and compassion." The discussion that followed was bitter. Threats of legal contestation, accusations of senility, even insinuations that Sophie was manipulating the elderly man to obtain advantages. Richard remained unwavering. When his children finally left, slamming the door and promising to return with lawyers, he felt a strange relief. Sophie, who had hidden with the other children during the discussion, approached timidly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Richard. We didn't want to cause problems with your family." Richard smiled, hugging her. "You didn't cause any problem, dear. You just helped me see the truth that had been before my eyes for a long time." In the following weeks, Richard dedicated himself to formalizing his project. With the help of lawyers committed to social causes, he created the Elizabeth Miller Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to sheltering and educating children in vulnerable situations. The Westridge Mansion was officially transformed into the Foundation's headquarters. Richard kept only one room for himself, converting the rest of the space into dormitories, study rooms, a library, and common areas. The garden, once merely decorative, gained a community vegetable garden and a playground. But the biggest surprise came from an unexpected source. One afternoon, while supervising the installation of computers in the new computer lab, Richard received a visit. Julian, the teenager who had interceded during the aggression. "Mr. Richard," said the young man, nervously, "I heard about your project. I came Came to ask if I can help in any way." Richard observed the young man carefully. In Julian's eyes there was a mixture of remorse and hope. It was the look of someone seeking redemption. "We always need volunteers," responded Richard, "especially young people who can serve as positive examples." Thus, Julian became the first of many young people from the community to volunteer at the foundation. He worked on weekends and after school, helping with daily tasks, teaching sports to the children, himself learning about the value of service to others. One day, while Richard was organizing documents in his office, Sophie entered silently, carrying a small box. "Mr. Richard, I found this among my things. I think you should have it." Inside the box was a worn notebook with a faded floral cover. Richard opened it with curiosity, finding page after page of childish handwriting, telling stories of daily life under the viaduct. "It's my diary," explained Sophie. "Like your wife's, I started writing after my grandmother passed away. She said that putting feelings on paper helps us not to get lost." Richard carefully leafed through the pages, moved by the maturity and sensitivity that emanated from those simple words. In one of the entries, Sophie described the day she saw him in the park, pretending to sleep with his wallet exposed. "I saw a white-haired gentleman sleeping on the bench. He seemed so lonely, even wearing expensive clothes. He had a wallet, full of money on his lap. But what caught my attention most were the wrinkles of sadness around his eyes. Money doesn't cure loneliness, so I gave him Brave and my blanket, because sometimes what we need isn't what others can see, but what they don't see." Richard couldn't hold back the tears. How could a 10-year-old child have such wisdom? The similarity with the thoughts he had found in Elizabeth's diaries was impressive. "Sophie," he said after wiping away his tears, "you remind me so much of Elizabeth, not just for what you do, but for how you see the world." The girl smiled. "Mrs. Josephine showed me pictures of her. She had kind eyes." Yes, she did. And she knew how to see kindness in others, even when they themselves couldn't see it. That night, after the children fell asleep, Richard went to the garden. The starry sky reminded him of the nights when he walked hand in hand with Elizabeth across that same lawn, making plans for the future. "You were right, my love," he whispered to the stars. "You always were. I needed to lose almost everything to understand what really matters." 1 year after the meeting in the park, the Elizabeth Miller Foundation was already serving 40 children. The press, which initially exploited the sensationalist aspect of the story, "Millionaire abandons biological children for street children," gradually changed the tone to reports about the positive impact of the initiative. Richard received invitations for lectures, interviews, even book proposals about his experience. He declined most, preferring to dedicate his time to the children and the administration of the foundation. His biological children, after frustrated attempts to legally contest his decisions, eventually distanced themselves. Only Victoria, the youngest, timidly reconnected, touched by an unexpected visit from Sophie to her decoration store. "Your father misses you," Sophie had said with characteristic frankness. "He keeps all your photos and speaks of you with pride." On the morning of his 74th birthday, Richard woke up to the sound of voices singing "Happy Birthday." Sophie led a group of children entering his room carrying a homemade cake, decorated irregularly but made with evident care. "Happy birthday, Mr. Richard," they exclaimed in unison. In the midst of the celebration, Richard noticed a small package on his bedside table. Inside, he found a new teddy bear, larger and nicer than the old Brave, with a small plaque embroidered on its chest. "For the bravest man we know," Sophie explained. "We took a vote. All the children agreed that you deserved your own guardian against nightmares." Richard hugged the present against his chest, unable to express in words the gratitude he felt. Suddenly, he realized something extraordinary. He couldn't remember the last time he had had a nightmare. Since Sophie had entered his life, the emptiness that had tormented him since Elizabeth's departure had been filled with a new purpose. That afternoon, while observing the children playing in the garden, Richard noticed something peculiar on the wooden bench near the artificial lake. Someone had engraved a phrase in the wood. "Here, a man relearned what humanity is." He looked around trying to identify the responsible person. Sophie was playing with other children. Julian was organizing a soccer game. Josephine was serving lemonade. Caramel was napping under the shade of a tree. Each of them, in their own way, had contributed to his transformation. Richard smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. The test that had begun on that park bench, with an exposed wallet and half-closed eyes, had taught him the most valuable of lessons. True wealth was not in what we possess, but in what we are capable of giving. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that Richard and Sophie's journey has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional voyage, we've prepared a special playlist with equally moving stories about transformations and second chances. Find it here, clicking to your left. If this narrative stirred emotions in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Daily, we bring unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of human life. Share with us in the comments which moment of this story touched your heart the most. We're eager to read your impressions and continue